can you give us some information about what you know about whether the UK is effectively involved in genocide?
Absolutely. Britain has a secret military agreement with Israel, which it refuses to make public. It has just been published by the Times that Britain is training the Palestinian Authority to assume some form of puppet rule in Gaza, following Israel's operations there. Whether that will or won't happen, what is certainly clear is that Adam Smith International, which is a private intelligence company set up by former agents from British, various agencies of British intelligence, are involved in a day-to-day way in managing the Palestinian Authority. And we have seen an integration of Israeli intelligence agencies and British intelligence agencies across the last few decades. So what that means is Britain outsources things to Israel, which I can get into, but Israel also outsources things to Britain. You also have tens of military flights that have gone, RAF flights that have gone from the British military base in Cyprus, which basically has a 40-minute flight time from Tel Aviv. It's about 180 miles away. Now, those flights are planes that could carry weapons on them. And also, that's a very irregular amount of flights to go in such a short space of time from that base to Tel Aviv. When you compare it to the amount of flights that have gone pre-war, it's a very, very clear increase, which is certainly significant. In addition to that, you've had Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, say that the British military is intercepting the electronic communications of the Palestinian resistance from its base in Cyprus and feeding that information to the Israelis. On top of that, you have the mobilization by the British of the Shadow R1 spy plane over Gaza. Now, its claim is that that plane's mission is to aid with the hostage rescue, but that is one of Israel's military objectives. And in addition to that, the Shadow R1 spy plane, one of its specialities is target acquisition. In addition to that, we saw the Foreign Office dodge Jeremy Corbyn's question about SAS operations in Gaza. What we also know is that the government put a D notice out to pressure people in the media not to report about British SAS operations vis-a-vis Gaza. Now, if there were no SAS operations in Gaza, why would the British government require the D notice to tell the media not to publish information about it? So there's a myriad of ways that Britain seems to be involved with what is happening. You also have the US. The Israelis are claiming that the US, across the period of this war, have sent over 200 planes, cargo planes of weapons. Now, it seems that some of those flights that have gone from the British base in Cyprus to Tel Aviv have been US planes carrying weapons. We also know that the NSA has access to intelligence on that base and is sharing the information with Israel on a daily basis. So there's a lot pointing to Britain having a logistics, nuts and bolts type of role in this war. Obviously, Britain's arms trade relationship with Israel is of interest. It's obviously far less lucrative than the US, and it's focused more on components. So, for instance, there are 79 different companies in Britain who manufacture components for the F-35 and F-16 fighter jet. For example, BAE Systems, Britain's largest arms manufacturer, produces the HUD technology for targeting within the F-16. Now, this is a contraption which is absolutely vital to Israel's current war in Gaza and has been vital to its previous wars in Gaza. So that leads us to believe that Britain has a significant role in Israel's war. You also look at the recent vote at the UN Security Council. Britain abstained and the United States voted against a ceasefire. And that's because those two countries, in a way which is different from any other countries, are active participants in the war. Germany, for example, is arming Israel extensively, but it has a less direct and hands-on role, I would say, in a day-to-day way than the British and the US do. When we look at, for instance, the British political elite, you have a lot there that is worthy of investigation. David Cameron, for example, the current foreign minister in Britain, was previously a patron of the JNF, which is Israel's largest settlement building body in the occupied West Bank. It features as patrons on it the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, and the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. It also has Tony Blair, supposedly the Middle East peace envoy, on the patron board of this organization, which has a very clear role in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Of course, you had the case of Suella Braverman as the Home Secretary. This was somebody who claimed that she had members of her family currently serving in the Israeli military. But even if you look at someone like the Minister of Culture, Lucy Frazier, now this is someone who's been directly lobbied by the Board of Deputies and We Believe in Israel to help them cleanse Spotify of pro-Palestinian music. Well, Lucy Frazier, before she became the Minister of Culture in Britain, actually interned at the Israeli Ministry of Justice. Can you think of a relationship as lopsided as that, where somebody can intern at the ministry of a foreign government and then become a minister within another government? You also have the interesting case of Robert Jenrick. Now, Jenrick is somebody who has been particularly militant in his support for Israel. He's lobbied to try and redefine anti-Zionism as a form of anti-Semitism. But what he's also said is that he's a close family friend of Aiden Offa. Now, Aiden Offa is the owner of many of these ships which have been seized and attacked close to Yemen. Now, the reason that has happened is because the Offa family ships have been reported by the Times newspaper to have been used for the transportation of Israeli elite units for assassinations in the region. They were in fact used, Zodiac Maritime, the Offa family's shipping company, was used to transport spies into the UAE to carry out the assassination of somebody who was in charge of the Palestinian resistance organization's weapons procurement, Mr. Mabhouh, in around 12 years ago or so. Now, when that happened, these Israeli agents that were transported on this ship, and bear in mind, Zodiac Maritime of the Offa family is a UK registered company. Now, at that time, the British government was supposedly so offended that this had happened and that these agents used fake British passports that they actually expelled several diplomats from the Israeli embassy as punishment for this. But what they didn't do was stop the company that had transported these agents from operating in Britain. And they carried out more assassinations in the region using Zodiac Maritime ships and ships belonging to Aiden Offa and the Offa family. So Robert Jenrick essentially is linked to Israeli intelligence by having somebody like that as a quote unquote close family friend. And then we look at, of course, the interesting case of Rishi Sunak. Now, Rishi Sunak's family business, Infosys, which was founded by his father-in-law, and which his wife still has 500 million pounds worth of shares in to this day, up until April of this year, had on its board of directors Yuri Levine. Now, Yuri Levine was a veteran of Unit 8200, which is the key Israeli military intelligence unit, which is focuses on the signals intelligence. So it is the equivalent of GCHQ here. It surveils Palestinians, spies on their communications, and according to whistleblowers from the unit, it uses that information to blackmail Palestinians. You then have the interesting case of the Memorandum of Understanding signed between Infosys in 2012 and the Office of the Chief Scientist of Israel to collaborate on research and development. There also is the subsidiary of Infosys, Panaya, which had as its vice president of research and development Tal Arnon, who spent 12 years in the Israeli military intelligence before working for Infosys. He was in Unit 8153, another special ops unit. And so also another way in which Britain has an interesting connection to what Israel is doing is through having key figures within the Israeli military coming from Britain. So, for instance, you have Richard Heck, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Heck, an IDF international spokesman who you've seen on the news, dismissing the killing of Palestinian civilians as just a tragedy of war, speaks with a very strong Scottish accent. You have another example of key figures within the Israeli military's spokesman's department who have come from Harrow and others. Interestingly, when UJS, the Union of Jewish Students, President Nina Friedman was actually addressing Israeli President Isaac Herzog, she made mention of the fact that the UJS has alumni currently serving in senior positions in the Israeli government and even in the office of the President Isaac Herzog. What you have to remember is that Israel essentially has 400 tech companies operating in the UK. The trade relationship between the UK and Israel is worth around 7 billion a year. And across the last decade, the trade between Israel and the UK has grown by 73%. And that's led to the UK elevating Israel to a tier one cyber partner. We know also that they are developing the Golden Valley installation in Gloucester, which is taking place in direct collaboration with the state of Israel and essentially will function as an Israeli cyber base in Britain. Britain also has made the promise to defend Israel in the Human Rights Council and other international bodies, and has said explicitly that the UK will fight against the terming of Israel as an apartheid in these international settings. So we have to be very careful here, because a lot of the relationships between Israel and Britain are not very well known. You look at, for instance, the chairman of Elbit, Michael Federman. Elbit is, of course, Israel's largest arms company. It provides 85% of the drones that Israel uses in these military escapades in Gaza. And Michael Federman is not only chairman of Elbit, he's the top shareholder, and he has such a position of pride within British society that he was given a CBE by the Queen back in 2014. And, all of this is scratching the surface of Britain's connection with Israel. There's still far more there that I think should be of relevance and of interest to any British citizen. It's an issue of sovereignty. For example, when the British police hack phones, they use a company called Celebrite to do it. Now, Celebrite is a company headed by Dana Gerner, who is formerly of Unit 8200 in Israeli military intelligence. You also have an example where the CEO of Celebrite claims that they have remote access to all of their software and the way it is used by governments around the world. There's another key issue of sovereignty when you look at the fact that Oracle, which is the company which provides cloud services to the British Ministry of Defence, to the British Home Office, to the British Foreign Office, and the NHS. Now, Oracle as a company was founded by Larry Ellison, the seventh richest man in the world. Now, Larry Ellison is the biggest funder of the Friends of the IDF charity in recent history. He also funds settlements, but more worrying than that, Larry Ellison offered the directorship of Oracle to Benjamin Netanyahu. Just so people are clear and they understand, the company which handles the data of the British Ministry of Defense offered the directorship of the company to Benjamin Netanyahu. Is that something that we should be okay with? You also want to think more closely about the fact that Larry Ellison, before he obtained that contract during the Boris Johnson government, he had set up a charity called the Larry Ellison Foundation. Now, do you know who was, it was based in the UK. Do you know who was employed to head it and given £500,000 a year to do that? The father-in-law of Boris Johnson. Also, several high-ranking figures in the British departments of government were also employed by this charity, the Larry Ellison Foundation. The very month that Oracle, Larry Ellison's company, obtained this massive contract to handle all the data of British government departments, the Larry Ellison Foundation was shut down. So one could look at a situation like that and think there was some level of corruption involved in him obtaining that contract. You also have the case of British Telecom. So British Telecom in the last few years has been taken over by French-Israeli businessman Patrick Drahi. Now he's become the top shareholder in British Telecom, this key backbone infrastructure of Britain. Now his takeover of British Telecom was deemed so suspicious by the British government that they launched a national security investigation. Now, why might they do that? Well, Patrick Drahi also simultaneously owns several telecommunications companies in Israel, but more interestingly than that, he owns the TV channel I-24, which was found in a Haaretz investigation to operate as a proxy of the Netanyahu family. In addition to that, Patrick Drahi has bought several key media companies in France, one of them being the newspaper Liberation, which was founded by Jean-Paul Sartre, and replaced the editor of it with a veteran of Unit 8200 in Israeli intelligence. So I believe that the reason for the British government's investigation of his becoming top shareholder in British Telecom is that they suspected him of being some form of Israeli intelligence. So there's so many ways in which Britain and Israel are integrated, and particularly on this issue of data, we have a lot to be concerned about, in my opinion.